You. The cost of raising a child has risen to the point where it may be preventing some people from having children. The birth rate in the UK has been falling since 2010, so that's just after the financial crash. It has now fallen to 1.49 children per mother. That is the lowest birth rate in Western Europe. Now, here on You and Yours, we were talking about the cost of childcare for working parents in our phone in last Tuesday. And a number of women emailed us after that programme went out to say that they can't afford to have a baby, or if they're already mothers, they can't afford to have any more children. So here are a couple of them. Elaine's 31, Camilla's 38. They're both considering their options, and they spoke to me this morning. Camilla told me why she got in touch.
Well, really, it seemed to tick all the boxes for the position where I'm in. So I'm in my late 30s. I live in London, where costs are, of course, high. I have an absolutely delightful, most of the time, 2-year-old, and I work full time in professional services in London. Now, you think on the face of it, this sounds great. You know, you're established in your career. I work full time. My husband works full time. But to be totally honest, the costs of thinking about a second child are pretty crippling. Our first child is lovely. She took quite a long time to come along, so it may well be that a second child is that decision is taken out of our hands. But when you run the numbers, in order to put 2 children into childcare in our setting, which is a wonderful childminder, you need a pre-tax salary without any deductions for student loans, etc., of £65,000.
Each,
Um,
or
no,
between you?
no,
Between
between
you.
us.
And that would just cover
So
the childcare.
that covers just childcare, no other living expenses, and that is also a salary without taking off, as I said, pension contributions or a student loan, etc. And that's for 2 children. Now, I work in a well-paid profession, but that wipes out my salary. I'm the higher earner out of the two of us. And so, although we would love to have a second child, and I think if we are lucky enough to have one, we'll just have to try and make the numbers work. I realise that the position I'm in is not the same for a lot of people because our household income would just about stretch it, but with no other options. And I think that although the recent budget changes have helped, so we are now eligible to some child benefit, and the 15 funded hours again will help a little bit. The fact is that any pay rises for me will mean that I'm approaching a large fiscal cliff, whereby it doesn't make any sense for me to get a pay rise or indeed to increase hours and to continue on in my career.
You're 38 now, Camilla.
Yeah.
So where are you at with this?
I think that in the grand scheme of things, having the family that we would like to have, i.e., more than one child, is something that for us is more important than having expensive holidays or that lovely big kitchen extension. And I think it's really the fact that our disposable income would be wiped out to very, very little. We take in a lodger at the moment under she's come from Ukraine. And I think we would mean that although we can't afford to give up that income, we would be pretty sort of squished in a point where we both work in professional services and in a high point in our career. It's not a point necessarily that we thought would be possible or would be in a position where, having worked hard for 20 years, we are absolutely scraping by. We're approaching a mortgage, having to redo our mortgage next year, and that is again an added worry to add to a already pretty overburdened plate.
Well, let me bring Elaine in. Elaine, I know that you are a nurse and you also emailed us after hearing that discussion on the phone and about the cost of childcare. Is
Yes.
the idea that you won't be able to afford to have a child already weighing on you?
Yes, I suppose I wanted to email in just to share the emotional and I suppose the mental impact that these discussions, hearing these discussions of people, in these situations, struggling with childcare costs or having to make these decisions, later on in their 30s, the effect that's having on someone like me, at the start of my 30s, having already had the whole decade of your 20s where you could potentially have children sort of gone by. So yeah, it's definitely a factor. I've got the added complication of a healthcare problem. So I have long COVID, which I caught unfortunately nursing during the pandemic, and I have had to be off sick now for 3 years, and I'm still trying to sort of pick up the pieces of my life and adapt to that. So I was already, just about making ends meet when I was working full time, and childcare, issues, all the costs of having a child would have been an issue then. But now, with a much reduced income and increased health needs, that's even more difficult. And I'm just trying to work out whether this is a feasible option for me.
Do you see this in the friends around you, people of a similar age who would like to be mothers but are fearing that they won't be able to afford to have a child?
Yeah, it's something that my contemporaries will sit and chat about a little bit, and just everyone goes, I don't know, I if it happens, it happens. I'm not quite sure how to make it work, but I don't think we are having those conversations. Certainly around cost. I think there's a lot of unknowns. We don't quite know how much it's going to cost us, and I suppose there's this wait. I'm waiting. My friends are waiting for sort of the right, the right moment where we feel we've reached enough of a stable position to be able to go right. This is the opportunity. Let's go for this.
Do you have a
Um,
partner who would help you?
no, at the moment, I've not fortunately managed to find a partner who would be a suitable long term partner. But this is where finances really impacts every angle of your life, because I think going into any new or potentially new relationship, the question of children, do we want to start a family or not? Does the other person want children? Can they have children? Can they support me in my desire to have children? That's already weighing on people's minds. But I think when you've got limited finances and a health condition that really does limit your finances, that just adds so much more pressure on on a potential partner. And I've gone from being a financially independent, not wealthy, but a financially independent woman hoping for an equal relationship, to almost a sort of Jane Austen style character, having to really bear finances in mind in my life decisions. And it's not in alignment with my values to be hunting for someone with an income above a certain point just so I can be supported. That's not me.
Elaine, obviously it's complicated, isn't it? The reason why women have children or don't have children. Some people listening might say that part of what's happening is that we're setting the bar now higher materially of what materially we would like to give our children, when in previous generations, when women had less choice, I guess they would say people just did it and got on with it. What would you say to that?
It is different these days, I think, especially with our awareness of climate change and the impact that having children has on the planet. That's a reaction I've come across. Oh, are you thinking of having children? Even given the context of climate change, I think you do need to be thinking about the sort of material sides, trying to have a child in the way that is as environmentally friendly as possible. Unfortunately, that lifestyle is often, the game of healthy and wealthy people. Being able to walk or cycle or afford an electric car, or in the terms of children, washable nappies are coming back into fashion, like the old terry nappies. But the overall cost, I think, is cheaper, but the initial upfront cost, is a lot more. And people who haven't got £100 lying around, are going to buy the cheap ones. So yes, I think there's more of a trade off, and there's more of a sort of ethical dilemma these days between dropping fertility rates in this country versus climate change and managing your environmental impact. So I think there's just a lot of confusion and a lot of different issues surrounding all of this.
Elaine and Camilla. Well, the reasons behind the falling birth rate will be different for different people. Dr. Bernice Kuang has looked into that. She's a family demographer at the University of Southampton and the co-author of a new study on childlessness. Dr. Kuang, what we heard there from Camilla and Elaine, do their concerns chime with your research?
Hi, thank
Hi,
you so much for having
you're
me
welcome.
today. Yeah, it's always nice as a researcher to hear what people have to say, being in parallel to what we find, and we found very similar findings. So we looked at whether people intend to have children or not, so people who don't already have children, and among Gen Z and young millennials, we found that income, our financial situation is really important. So beyond traditional measures like household income and whether you have a job or not, we've also found that subjective feelings of optimism and pessimism about your future are really important too. So, as your first caller said, you might have a job right now, but if you're not feeling so good about prospects in the future or the security, or you feel like maybe you're behind where you want to be, you might nonetheless feel uncertain about starting a family. So, two really interesting subjective factors that we found that were really important for predicting whether you wanted to have children or not was, do you think your financial situation will get better or worse in the same 3 years? And then compared to your parents when they were your age, do you consider yourself better off than they were? So, people base their expectations on what they want for their children based on what they had in their own childhood. And with the cost of everything, being so high and things like runaway inflation being out of control and job insecurity, the insecurity of COVID, a lot of these issues are really affecting young people now who are at the precipice of making these decisions.
Could I ask you briefly, if you would, these worries about climate change, they were also reflected in a lot of the emails that we had. Did you find that?
We were expecting to find it, and we actually found, and we looked specifically at it because we get so many questions about it, but we actually found the opposite, where young people who were very worried about climate change were actually more likely to say they wanted children.
How
So
interesting.
that interpretation could be that if you want a family, you care about the climate.
Yeah. So
you have
hard
a
to
stake
sort
in the
out, isn't it?
game.
Yeah,
Right.
motivation and actions and all these things.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on. Dr. Bernice Kuang from the University of Southampton.